Hi guys, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
I'm your host,
Of
Kevin.
course.
And I'm your co-host Brian.
You're now tuned in to Coder Conversations. So it's been a little while since we had a software guy on the show, so it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the talk.
Absolutely. So you've been in the industry for what, about 3 years, 4 years?
Yeah, I would say I got my first unofficial web developer role in 2020, but I got my first developer role in 2022. That was like the title on the contract. And I worked as a software engineer for the first couple times, like 2 years ago, last year. So put that all together, I still feel like I have like 3, 4 years.
So what were you doing right away? You said what, like HTML, CSS, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it depends on how far back you want to go. Just because I went from like selling computers, I leveraged my sales experience to get into like a more technical role, and then I got like a CompTIA certification to actually get some like IT internships. And then
Right.
all the while, I was still trying to get into like web development, software engineering. I just didn't even have money for the coding boot camps, let alone like time for a bachelor's degree. And
Yeah,
somewhere
they're
around the pandemic,
expensive.
that happened.
They're like,
Yeah.
I went to one that was like 10 grand and that's like cheap. Some of these are like 20, 30 grand, these boot camps.
Yeah, mine was about 10 grand too, and I was not happy with the results. And halfway through,
Same here.
someone from the Washington Post reached out to me halfway through the coding boot camp because they were like doing a research thing on like predatory loans, and I was just like, all right, cool. Now I feel less confident about this.
Oh, that's funny.
I think, back in the day when it first started, they were worth it because they had the connections to get you in the door. But, once the industry became more and more saturated, you know, obviously you can't learn the entire gamut of software in like 3 to 6 months. So they're kind of giving you little pieces of this and that. And then if you can't get a job after it, you have this huge 10K loan of something you probably could have learned yourself.
Yeah,
That
it
was my
was.
situation.
You had a coding boot camp too?
Did you go to one, Kev?
No, I didn't go to one. I'm self-taught. So
Okay, yeah, I went to one
Nice.
for a year, and it was for Java Spring, MVC, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And no, I felt like, well, it's funny because as I was graduating the boot camp, the instructor pretty much tells me, "Hey, they're not really hiring entry level Java guys right now. You're gonna want to go out and learn React and Angular." And I'm like, "Oh, great." So I just spent the last year learning something that I'm not even going to be able to work with. And no, he was right. I mean, the first job that I got, it was with React. And, I had a couple of React projects, couple of Angular projects on my GitHub, and that's actually what got me in the door.
That's cool.
He was right. Yeah.
I feel like my first opportunity was it finally felt natural, but shortly afterwards, I learned about the pros and cons of like contracts. But I went to a coding boot camp. It was MERN stack, so like MongoDB, Express, React, Node.js, just all JavaScript. And I had a classmate who was struggling at first in the class, but like we worked together. We kind of like our group stuck together the entire time, and then she ironically got like one of the first jobs out of everybody after the boot camp, and she just had a lot of networking experience with recruiters and stuff and worked hard
Okay.
towards it, and she referred me at the top of the year. So about 6 months when I was pretty deep into like maybe that boot camp was not going to get me that role, all it took was a referral to a recruiter who had already had good experience with the first person. And then once I spoke to this guy, 2 weeks later, I had my first web developer job, and it was an okay web developer role. It paid well, and I got laid off from it, and that was my first experience into that.
Nice.
no, you learn really quickly. The software industry can be pretty cold. Like our first job, year there, get laid off, jump to another job, and it's just a cycle. You have to, even if you have a great job, you have to kind of have your feelers out there in case you just get canned out of nowhere. Like today, Oracle laid off 30,000 people. They wake up 6 a.m. They get a layoff email.
Yeah,
Pretty much.
and I want to say too that despite my personal struggles, right? Like I have ADHD, so I feel like that maybe is like something that makes it harder for me to learn. And also with not having like a graduate's degree and stuff like that, I personally feel that I lucked out in 2020 when other people were furloughed and laid off and like struggling. That was when I first had my remote role, first one ever, and it started off as a support analyst role because I kind of got like headhunted, and then my boss couldn't train me how she needed to, so I was like making the website responsive because physicians needed to use the website, and it was like broken
Okay.
bootstrap code.
Yeah.
And but then, like, I look at the last 4 or 5 years where like a lot of economic things that I don't fully understand happened, and then you've got this crazy emergence of learning language models that, for better or for worse, are going to make things a lot more efficient. And also, there's, on top of all these other parameters, there's like probably some speculation that it can do certain things that it won't be able to do, that it's starting to show that it can't do. And just all these different things have led to less jobs being available. Like 5 years ago, they were like, just become a data scientist, just become a
Yeah.
developer, an engineer, you'll have work. And now
Oh,
it's just
just
like, maybe you
apply.
should,
Yeah, just apply.
yeah, now it's like, you should be a nurse. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
Right.
that's a
No,
You
little too,
man.
should be an electrician.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep, exactly.
No, I mean, like, it's not really your fault because I know people who they have a nice, impressive resume, but they still can't get the job. Companies just aren't hiring because, like you mentioned, these LLMs, AIs, and all of that. They're really good at coding now. Like they're, I would say, even like senior level, if not more, because some of the stuff I've seen generated, it's really good. So how a junior gets in, I think probably the focus will have to be more, or mid level have to be more focused on like architecture, connecting systems, and you have to spend your free time doing it. And okay, look at what I did in a day. Look what I did in a week. Like you have to come at it like that more so than I know React, or I know Angular. I think just
Like you
knowing
can't be real general with it, you're saying.
knowing the framework itself, that's not what's gonna get you the job. It's more like connecting these systems together and doing things really quickly and efficiently, pretty much.
Yeah, and that's why, like, I joke with it because we've all heard the phrase doubling down. Every year, I'm just like, I'm tripling down, I'm quadrupling down. Like, for example, the thing I've been reading this week, I finished this great book on economists called The Economist's Hour. And because that's just sort of how I operate mentally, when I'm interested in something, I make a website about it. And so today, I just spun up Next.js and TypeScript front end, Postgres backend, and I'm just sort of working on the data right now, but I'm essentially creating like data visuals with placeholder data for now on economic stuff relating to like imports, exports. I'm trying to see what I can find online for products in each state, just to try to get an idea of like what jobs are available, what data is out there, what my capabilities with like an LLM can do to actually get like reliable data and like reliably get that visualized into something that's like custom made for me. And I've just been trying to put a lot of what I've been reading about with like just economic conditions into, LLMs, and using LLMs to try to help me get my next job, even if it's not a tech job, right? It could be technical support engineer, could be
Yeah.
freelance, could be, I don't know. Like I said, nursing is not really in my foray right now because I don't think I have 2 years to get something in 2 weeks. But it's just, I just feel like using it right now is where I'm at. I love it and I hate it at the same time. But the things I
Yeah.
love about it, I really love.
I think a lot of jobs are going to be kind of like pivoting to, okay, we want you to know React, we want you to know Angular, but we want you to have a lot of experience with Claude, Chat GPT, Gemini. I think that kind of stuff is going to start being required of, like, if you really want to get a job, especially as a junior. I think you're going to have some kind of AI skills just because it's so in vogue right now.
Yeah, AI tooling is definitely a phrase I see a lot more on things, just like you would see maybe like words like scalability and like performant code and things that are like just sort of like clean coding best practices that makes it like a good developer experience for like other developers. And I feel like you start to see AI tooling up there, but how much that's valued, I don't know. I wish it were a lot easier to crack the application system, right? Because sometimes you're just like, okay, well, I'm not gonna, I've always been told not to stuff a resume with keywords, but every time I go to like a resume service thing, it's just very much so about putting all these specific things that you have in your skill set on the resume, because if you don't, then maybe you won't make it. So it's tricky.
Yeah, like I've known a couple of people who've had a difficult time getting a job in the industry. So what they had to end up doing was like starting their own kind of freelancing business, and you reach out to these small businesses and offer them services that that would help them be more productive, and that's something that can hold you over and give you experience, like until you get that job, because I think having that experience, that's like the most important thing that companies are looking at now. You pretty much have to enter in as a mid-level developer, even for a junior role. You have to have like a couple of years of experience.
Yeah, I think a personal example I have from the past year or so is that I had a great contract, another one through the same company that got me my first official developer role. Uh, I worked at Boston Children's Hospital, and it was a contract to hire, but they just had some tough budget decisions, and they had kind of a shift where one person they thought was going to leave stayed and took over for two other people, and then they needed to backfill him, and it was a different position than the thing I was about to fill in a couple of years. So it just led to me learning about WordPress, Drupal, a little bit of AWS, but I can't really know how to do like DNS stuff on AWS and act like it's the same type of cloud understanding that people are really like talking about with like AWS skills.
Right.
And last year I made a website because I'm a townie. I live in Salem, Massachusetts, and a lot of people in this area know me because I'm always at the same cafe, and I'm always at the community table, meeting new people, making connections and stuff, always on my computer.
That's
And
great.
guy was running for city councilor elect, and I made his WordPress website with the skills that I had earned, that I learned from Boston Children's Hospital. It was pretty easy. Like, obviously, it was more so like about getting the plugins connected appropriately to certain things like Stripe or like a bank account. He didn't really get picky with uh, the theme of the website, so it was more so like out of the box, kind of those things that as like a developer you almost like to do a little less, because it's just like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to make like an entire theme out of PHP or something if I don't want to buy one, or just do this. But it was easy enough, and it's like you said, it's just take the skills that you teach yourself and make money any way you can. I think the book that I was reading about with the economic stuff, it was just a big reminder, because I'm not one of those like grab your bootstraps by the people or whatever that phrase is. I'm not one of those types of people, but at the same time, like I'm hard on myself. And I just was reading
Yeah.
about like the Great Depression and stuff, and I'm just like, man, back then I don't know how much they were talking about being like an extrovert or an introvert, and but still, like to this day, I'm sure there's so many people that are struggling all the same. But like maybe there's one person who's just like willing to face rejection over and over and over again, and just go to all their local businesses, just
Yeah.
find one person that they could freelance with, and maybe it turns into being self-sustaining and not needing to even be hired after a certain point. But yeah, that's the hard part, is just like you said, just like find opportunities to freelance or work for somebody, just like little projects, something to get you by. So
Yeah.
that's sort of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, like we talk to people across all these different industries, and now it's like, okay, 60% talent in the skill that you want a job or make a living out of, and then the rest is like marketing yourself and putting yourself out there, getting in front of people. Like, like for like you mentioned rejection, Brian, he does the booking on the show. For him to, be able to book some of these people, he's had to face a lot of rejection. So like
Oh
with
yeah.
that, it's just like hammering people over and over and over, and then training yourself to not take it personal. Like you have to go through the gauntlet these days.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because I still am so averse to rejection. Like every time I get an email, also it might be an ADHD thing. There's this thing called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and I sometimes wonder if I have it. But like every
Yeah.
time I see like after careful review, or we regret to inform you, like as soon as I see that in the email, I'm like, okay, I get it. And but it's ironic because I do stand up comedy, And
Oh,
you
wow.
would think I've gotten used to getting rejected, but it's different because at least every once in a while I make people laugh. I feel
Right.
like just constant rejection on the emails
No
is it,
plus.
yeah, it just makes you wonder if it's you, right? It's like hard not to after a while feel like you're a little insane for expecting a different outcome of just keep upskilling, keep making projects, keep networking, keep applying. Something's got to give, and it's just like okay, well, it's been a few years now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like even when I got in, 10 years ago when it was a lot easier, I still had to put in tons of applications, face tons of rejection. They would always say, "Oh yeah, we want somebody with experience. You need like 2 years of experience." And what I had to eventually do is just kind of make a game out of it. Like, okay, I'm gonna get 10 rejections today. Like, make that your win. Like, okay, I'm gonna get
Right.
20 rejections today, and eventually one of them is gonna turn up as a success. But like, just not taking the rejection personal and just continuing to go after it. It's kind of like insanity. Like you're doing the same thing over and over, and it seems like you're getting the same result. But one of those eventually should turn up into something, And but it's just that process of what we perceive as a negative.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in it's only kind of over if you like quit and you give up because I remember, let's see, last year was 2 years. So in 2024, when I got this opportunity for Boston Children's Hospital, I was living in my car.
Mm,
So at that
Oh,
point,
wow.
the first, like I had gotten laid off before and my unemployment ran out. And again, like I can talk about that if you want, but it was a big learning experience going from like laid off, suddenly finding out in the summertime that it's a terrible time to try to find work because
yeah,
all the managers are on vacation, so the recruiters can't reach out to them.
Yeah.
It's summertime, and then starting to understand how like budgets and quarters have an impact. And but then also, I got this great book that I read a good chunk of. I think his name is like George Lee Oros. He's like the pragmatic engineer guy. He's pretty often on like LinkedIn, but he wrote a book that was somewhere along the lines of like software engineer's guidebook. And it talks about sort of like from the early part of your career up until the point where you're like either deciding to be like a staff engineer or like a manager, whether you want to be like a VP or something like that. And it just really helped me understand a lot of the differences between developer and engineer, and also why contracts are sometimes the positions where you don't get as much training, as much ownership, as many benefits, but maybe you get a higher wage than you would expect, and then all of a sudden you're the first one gone a lot of the times if
Right.
the budget cuts need to happen and you're expendable. And so it was just a good learning experience, and that's sort of when I transitioned from like web development to software engineering because I was always under the understanding that software development was maybe like a separate thing technically. But I feel like nowadays it's just like web developer or software engineer. And there's so many other phrases, titles that you see. But for the most part, it's like software engineering is just sort of like a different beast than web development, I feel like that's when it gets a little bit more into the computer science fundamentals. And again, nowadays a front end is very often a back end. It's just like, do I learn about reconciliation in React
Yeah.
and hope that it sticks again? Or do I learn about like Java? Because a lot of times a front end engineer is like got back end things on the list and you're just like, okay, all right. And that's just sort of the reflection of the times now, right? I'm sure 5 years ago things were a little bit different for you guys when you seen the job postings. They're probably ridiculous, but I'm sure there was a little bit more of a reasonable chunk of.
Yeah, I think right now they want everyone to be full stack. Full stack. Okay, you can do front end, great, but we just have to let our back end guy go. So we're going to want you to pick up a little bit of the slack. I think that's happening a lot, especially people being laid off due to AI. You have less people working, but same amount of workload probably. So they're just going to separate. Okay, we just lost Johnny, so now you're going to take this, you're going to take that. I think that's what I'm seeing or just hearing from people that they're getting way more put on their plate because of the layoffs. Same amount of work, less employees though.
Yeah, it totally tracks. I don't know if you're seeing any different, Kevin.
So When I started initially, yeah, like specialists, okay, you have Angular 2 or whatever, then you were in ultra demand because companies they were moving to this, so you could be a specialist, but now you almost have to be like a walking tech department. Like, okay, front end, back end, but now you need to do some DevOps, you need to do I guess like
Yeah.
ADA compliance, okay, a little bit of cybersecurity, like a little bit of everything. Because yeah, they want somebody that comes in and I guess like if they let somebody go, okay, you fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
So I know we only have limited time, so it's kind of hard. Like, what should I focus on? And that's the real challenge. But I think like going forward, in the era of AI, what I'm seeing is like you have to understand how systems connect, and then you have to kind of understand security because, AI, it can do a lot, but if you're not careful, it can delete your production database. So kind
Yeah.
of,
It's interesting too because and I'm sure a lot of people share my sentiment. I think like after a while my brain just started to like not care anymore. And it's like very hard to learn about something when you just finally feel like, all right, I don't even feel like respected in this industry. At one point it was
Yeah.
like great money, but it was short lived and I just didn't hit that savings bubble or something. But at the same time, um, some of the things that again when you spread too thin, right? Where it's like, all right, you're a front end engineer, but do you know Java and AWS? You're a front end engineer, but do you have like an eye for design? Can you create the wireframes in like Figma? And it's just like, okay, like, which parts of the IT department can I be at most? And
yeah,
it's, I would say one thing that's pretty cool though is that this recent opportunity that I don't know if it's going to happen, but I had a lot of fun considering it was the web accessibility role, where I would be sort of leveraging my backgrounds with web accessibility in development and using it to be more of a digital accessibility specialist and turning into like a more like consulting role that audits and remediates and that. So that's been a pretty cool option. But again, with the LLM stuff, I feel like it makes it easier sometimes to appreciate some of the skills that are harder to learn, like TypeScript, test driven development. Those are huge things, especially on the front end right now. And I actually feel like they make learning language models a little bit easier to work with because you can sort of just, obviously you're going to be like working in like branches, right? So you don't blow up the production and all. But when you've
yeah,
got like
Right.
you've got linters and you've got tests and like, I just feel like there's a lot of checks and balances to sort of borrow like a governmental phrase that if you are better at working with the LLM, uh, it makes it easier to use. And I think if you start to figure out how to use LLMs more together, which is eventually what I want to get into, I think it's even better because then it's more like cost effective. And it's like, how can your tooling work without maybe costing you like $200 or more a month? And then, if you put, it's almost like right now, the LLMs kind of have the same issue that like we do, right? Where it's just like, are you a specialist or are you a generalist? Like, do you have to do everything either way? Like, at what point do you
Right.
just cognitively get spread thin? And I noticed that with like a context window, whereas it's like one day you're working with Cursor or Claude or Chat, and it's like the best engineer that you've never worked with. You're like, this is amazing. And then like one moment it's amazing, and then it's just dumb all of a sudden. You're just like, why are you bad at math all of a sudden? Like you can't add
Right. Like, what's
like
going on
what?
here?
Yeah, you don't know what a seahorse emoji is. Like, what are you going? Like the simple stuff that it struggles with sometimes. It's just like, wow, that's a pretty big industry for not knowing whether there's a seahorse emoji.
Yeah.
I think it's about to be a big opportunity for like developers that actually know how to develop because a lot of people are really leaning into AI and their development skills are atrophying. So all it takes is a couple of huge disasters like I mentioned. It's happened before. The AI deletes the production database, or you
Mhm.
know this AI produces this really unsecure code that the person approves it because they don't really know how to read code because they've been using the AI all this time. They're not as rigorous in
Right.
reviewing the code, and now you have this huge issue that's costing the company millions of dollars. I think that's gonna that is it's eventually gonna turn the tide, and developers who know the fundamentals of computer science, they know, secure, like cybersecurity, a little bit like that kind of thing. That's gonna be in vogue. It's just gonna take a little time. It has to be a couple of disasters before companies realize that just letting
Yeah.
AI go wild isn't the move.
I mean, and I guess they call it the AI bubble. I think it's
Yeah.
called the AI bubble for a reason. You think about like the dot-com bubble back in like 99, you know, the progress can't just keep exponentially going up and going up. It's gonna burst at some point.
Yeah, and I'll be real. The last contract I worked at, it was sort of like short lived. It was like a place called Carrot. I had no idea what they were talking about half the time because they had so many technologies I was learning at once, like Ruby on Rails and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That's one of those jobs where you
Oh,
like
wow.
are like more front end focused and you just start off on Ruby. And it didn't help that I'd be like talking to my senior like staff AI engineer friend, and he'd be like, "Oh yeah, I hate Ruby," and I'm just like, "Oh, you too." But you have 20 years experience. Oh no. And just learning all these things, and then on top of that learning about like their products and their scheme, like their all these different things at once. But it's one of those things where you could still tell even when you're confused and struggling to learn who knows what, like who knows their stuff. And I remember my manager, he was a younger guy and he was just like solving coding problems in his dreams. It was crazy. And he was talking about the AI bubble. He thinks it's going to burst. And I was like, I don't really
Yeah.
know too much about nothing, but this guy don't miss. So I get it, but at the same time, uh, I, I also read a book last year on economics. I read a couple hundred pages, then I got laid off, and I was like, economics, no. Uh,
Economics.
but the big thing that I was driving home was about efficiency, which can be overrated too, I think. But I feel like one thing that LLMs are going to bring is efficiency. It's like you said, it's why like junior developers are probably struggling to find work right now because it's like, again, if you could find a senior to use some type of GitHub Copilot AI that can create tickets faster with like a fraction of the cost. But there was a company I interviewed for. I didn't get it because it was just sort of like not my, not I wasn't what they were looking for. They weren't what I was looking for. But Gray Swan AI, and there's a lot of companies that are already dedicated towards like AI security. Like there's even like these benchmarks they're talking about, like weapons of mass destruction. I think the gist of it is to make sure that your agent inside of like your production base isn't going to like somehow like teach a user like how to make a weapon of mass destruction. So I feel like there's all those types of things that you know even if AI code or generated stuff creates issues, I think it'll probably create different positions that who knows, maybe people that have been struggling longer in cybersecurity suddenly get more opportunities because AI creates some gnarly issues. But I'm still trying to figure out whether
Yeah.
people are using agents when they don't need to. Like a lot of people are using AI for something that they should like automate. And I heard a nightmare like what you described before. Like someone on Reddit, I think, talked about how they just completely had to redo 2 quarters worth of like financial data because they made decisions based off the data that they got with the help of AI, and the AI
It was
rather than
wrong.
like it hallucinated it. And like and I think that's one of the issues. Perhaps I could be wrong, but hear me out. With LLMs, right? It's very agreeable, and even that has gotten some issues here and there. Like some people with, like mental health issues, maybe they're
Yeah.
like confiding in it, and then it's just like, yeah, I agree with you. You should do whatever you're talking about. And it's the same thing with efficiency, where I feel like sometimes it'll hallucinate to be like, all right, like I this is gonna sound a little tinfoil hat, but just sometimes I feel like when you're in a context window, whether it's like Cursor or like ChatGPT, I feel like after a certain point, like if you're just like, okay, like this is 100 things on this page, turn this into 100 other things, and it's like, yeah, totally, got it. And then it does like 20, and you're like, but you didn't do the thing you said you were going to do. And I just feel like that edge towards like efficiency is like almost makes it like not do the thing that you told it to do. And whether that's hallucinating or not, I
Right.
think like that's what, just again, like I one workaround I'll say for anyone that might find it interesting. My buddy told me this. He's actually like more of a product engineer, art director, but he's a whiz. That it's one of those things where like you'll have a LLM maybe create like a Python script for like a function to do some type of calculation, right? Because like you want to have like that, how would you call it? deterministic solution, like software engineering, compared to
Right.
like a
Yeah.
probabilistic, like AI, like kind of like error prone type of thing.
Okay.
Uh, and then instead of having the AI sort of like just whip up this thing that maybe would have been problematic in that Q1, Q2 example, you would have it use that Python function. So that way, like, it's using the same function over and over again. But then, that's where it gets into these agentic things, right? Where it's like evaluation and just checks and balances, making sure that things are using the right tools and stuff. That's still where it's like outside of my understanding right now. I'm just trying to get better at it. And I feel like that if you just keep digging right now, and no matter how tough it is, if you could do what you need to do. Like I'm doing Instacart right now. It's terrible. I hate it. But
Yeah.
when I'm driving home from Instacart, I'll talk to my car with Claude or not ChatGPT. I try to switch over to Claude just like when I just was reading stuff in the news, but Claude, I don't know what it is. Like I have a better success rate with talking to ChatGPT for a longer time. It just Claude seems to like cut out. And with ChatGPT, I'll ask it all these questions about web accessibility. And then a couple days later, when I could take a day off, I transcribe all the notes and then I make a website with it just so I can understand more
Wow.
about like how to put it together. So like even if you're in a very undesirable situation, I feel like it gets to a point where like not everyone's going to have options. That's just plain and simple. Like it's not like this is a fair world, but at the same time, until it's counterintuitive to just look for something completely unrelated to like what you want to earn, even if it's way less, like I still feel like there's possibilities, right? It's like never say never, or like, once you give up, you give up, but
Yeah, I mean,
you
it
put it down, pick it up.
sounds like to me you're a real go-getter. You're not going to be denied.
Yeah, it's funny. You know how sometimes context can change the same meaning? Like I feel like there's three different words that are positive, neutral, or negative. Is obstinate, stubborn, and determined. So I feel like I'm very stubborn. And for the past few years, like I just got that taste of like uh, a modest paying tech job that finally took me in, like for the first person in my family in like several generations to like have like that average, like what was the thing the book called it, income per capita in Massachusetts. Like I finally got a decent paying job, and then I was like living in my own apartment, and then I got laid off for the first time. And then
Yeah.
I struggled. I delayed going on unemployment because I wasn't like trying to go on unemployment. It's like I'm gonna get another job right away. And then I
Right.
waited till the last minute, and I found out my information was kind of like stolen. Like I was already in the system. And that's when I
Wow.
learned that Massachusetts has a really inefficient way of going about the Department of Unemployment Assistance. And
Wow.
yeah, it's just learning experiences, right? But eventually you start to figure out that, like, okay, like you still have to like try to learn the right things, and there's like a weird meta decision making that you have to eventually figure out. Like me, I don't really get into Angular or Vue as much, even though at certain
Yeah.
points, like it's been more like AI generated projects. But like, you know one job is going to ask you to do Ember, another job is going to ask you to do a React. Most of the time it's React, but most of the time it's TypeScript, right? So like Angular,
TypeScript. Yeah.
you yeah. And like, right now I'm trying to get into more full stack projects, just because I feel like I've already done enough with React, with responsive web
Yeah.
design, with like look how many components I can make, look at the AI tooling. Like now it's important for me to get a stronger base with like some database fundamentals, just because that's my struggle too, is when I use backend, I use like Node. So I'm just using JavaScript anyway, but
Right.
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, you want to hear something funny? Me and Kev, we got a buddy. He used to work at the Pentagon, and we were talking about cybersecurity. And I was saying, well, I've heard cybersecurity. It's really not an entry level field. Like they're gonna want to see help desk. They're gonna want to see support analyst, support engine. Like they're gonna want a couple of years of something else before they actually, open the gates to you in the cybersecurity world. But he said one of his at the Pentagon, one of his coworkers had a not a master's, a PhD. This guy had a PhD in cybersecurity, and he was working help desk because that's the only place that would hire him. So like that to me is really eye opening because you got a lot of people say, oh yeah, you got to get the bachelor's, you got to get the master's, and like you need the real world experience. That's what companies are hiring on, real world experience.
Yeah. No, you're so right. I think that being in such a damned position has really gotten me more interested in economical stuff, because it's just fascinating that again, my first layoff introduced me to like, okay, why are all these front end development jobs looking so different? Is because a lot of times they're just not calling it a software engineer job. Maybe it just pays less to call it a web developer role. But then you start to look at the skills over and over again, and you're like, okay, what's the aggregate? What's like the trend? And you're like, it's more of a software developer, a software engineer role. And all these factors I take into consideration. Like that's why I kind of like what you said. I had some help desk stuff on the way. That's sort of how I went from IT intern to help desk to support analyst to web developer, back and forth.
Right.
But like right now, I've started to look more into technical. Sorry if you guys can hear the text message sounds. I don't really know how to do that off my phone on my computer, but the technical support engineer is a role that I've been looking at a lot. And again, same thing with web accessibility. It's very cool though. Like I'm trying to really dig into like in terms of like the imports and the exports, right? Or it's just like, okay, maybe remote work for me is a thing of the past for now. I'm okay with that. I just want to get a job in tech. And if I can't get
Yeah.
a job in tech, what's adjacent, right? Like what jobs are available in my state or elsewhere? And like, what are the imports and exports? It seems like financial is a big thing in Massachusetts, that in healthcare, but it's like, all right, I don't have time to become a physician right now. Like what is available in this field or something adjacent? I'll just figure it out
Right.
from there.
And you might have to enter through the side door like QA, even though that's not necessarily what you want to do, as long as it gets you in the company and then you can pivot. So I've heard of people like,
Oh yeah.
entering through that door and then they switch roles. So yeah, like you mentioned, just get a job in tech and then you can hone down on what you want once you've got that experience.
I mean, a good example of that, I got a
Yeah.
buddy who works in the game industry and he started off in QA and he just built up, leveled up, leveled up. Now he's a creative director and he's making six figures. So, it is possible to kind of, yeah, going through the side door and then slowly you kind of get pushed up front, especially if you're good at what you do. If you legitimately have a good skill set, then that's worth money. It's worthwhile.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing, right? Is that trying to what's that thing about like a fish comparing himself to a bird, right? Where like some people maybe they're best behind a computer, maybe they don't even maybe they have one of those middle mice, right? They don't even use like the clicking anymore. They're just like they do everything through like Vim or something. Maybe that's where somebody shines. And maybe sometimes it's just me trying to be a bird instead of a fish because I make websites and people see me at the cafe and every now and then I get commissioned to do some stuff. But at the same time, especially with being like a stand-up comedian, I learned something funny from Reddit, which was there was a stand-up guy who worked at Microsoft for like 6 years and he self-funded himself and he left his job and he pursued his career. He released like his first special, but everyone was talking online about like how software development really is like the worst possible job to have for like stand-up comedy. And you would expect it not to be because you're like, but you can like sustain a living and go out more and like read more
Yeah.
and write more. But you're spending the entire day just your value is your mind, right? And your output, your productivity. And you're not having interesting conversations for the most part. You're probably burnt out by the time you're done, even though you're probably struggling to get to the gym. Um, Me, I like training
Yeah.
people. I like working with people, and that's why like some of these roles, like when I was a support analyst at Kimball, which is more of a traditional role where I was like working on a Salesforce project and I was working with business to business positions like business analysts. I would go in, I would use Sockwell, which is like Salesforce SQL basically, and I
Yeah.
would query records and I would identify things and I'd like sort of cross check it with like our documentation, other documentation that was sort of like their service delivery history to try to understand like what unique features they had on objects that maybe have changed over time, which is maybe why information was consistent. And then I have to like get on the computer, screen share, educate them, dumb it down, not like dumb, but sort of like, as someone who's like in a different position than I am, and then also determine like when to escalate, when to connect them to their CSM for like things that are more education or service delivery that would cost them something. And I think if my next role was even in person, hybrid, full time, like that's why I'm hoping to at one point get back into data analytics, because it was sort of early on the initial goal. Just I got really down this rabbit hole with software engineering because it was like, okay, just learn HTML and then make a website. And now it's just like sometimes I'm wondering, like, is that why I'm struggling with the data algorithms? It's just part of it is just like maybe I just don't care. I don't know, because it's like I care about the data algorithms,
Well,
but you know what I mean? Like the leak code compared to
I
like,
mean, man,
you know,
it's tough because I was doing the software thing for a little bit. I ended up burning out in 2 weeks. My first full-time role, they were riding me hard, like they wanted me, so-called hit the ground running with React. They brought me in as a junior React dev, but they had a code base with no notes, no documentation, and they just said, here's the code base, go build out these features. So I'm like sitting there sweating, like, I don't know how to tell you guys this, but I have no idea what I'm doing. And so I lasted there for, about 2 weeks. But like we were talking about before with the boot camps and all that, I went to a boot camp and we didn't do any data structures or algorithms at all during the boot camp. So then I get out and I'm applying to jobs and I'm interviewing and I'm realizing, oh, wow, like a lot of these places, they judge you on leak code, they judge you on algorithms. And I always struggle with that. I never, even to this day, I don't really understand them. I just don't have I mean, I'm a drummer, so my mind works well with rhythm and all that, but with algorithms and data structures, it just like never really clicked for me.
yeah. And one thing that Kevin touched on earlier, uh, I took a free course last year. Shout out to this dude, Maxi Ferreira. He created a free front end architecture course, and it was the first time that I started to, again, like I learned so much that I just forget so much what I learned, but it really helped me understand that if you understand the architecture, like I'm not really like a systems design person, but I'd be sooner to learn that over like data algorithms, I feel. Because like part of me is just like at this point in my time, I'm trying to figure out like how can I understand what needs to be done at a level that I can sort of basically generate it with an LLM. Like I hate to say it, but like that's sort of like what it's coming back to, is just like not to rely on it so much, but at the same time, like if you know like what a front end is supposed to look like, what a back end is supposed to look like, if you have checklists for everything and you just know what to manually look for, like I think that's sort of the trap that I'm still falling into right now, is that like when I started off using ChatGPT, I felt like it was for the right reason. I was at my first developer role, I was regressing. It was like easy stuff, but it wasn't like too many opportunities, like a sprint here, a little bit of React there. I
Right.
was actually created this cool thing on my personal time with Python because I was like my first programming language, and it was a resume equalizer where I learned a couple of videos, NLTK, which is like natural language processing, and I would take a job description, paste it into Google Docs, save it as a PDF. I would upload it, kind of just like a Google search bar, just like drag it right there, and then I would parse it. Every word in it would be sort of like cleaned and stripped, all the duplicates removed, like through like set objects. And then it would use the Python library to tag it as a part of speech. And it would just return it in like a FAQ, like an accordion, like a bootstrap component
Oh,
that would
wow.
basically give you all the words from the resume, or rather through the job description, just in like different parts of speech. So like if you're trying to use all the words from the job description to like write into your resume as good as possible. And then ChatGPT came out and I was like, oh, this, it could do it on accident now. Like that's just a byproduct of how awesome this is that I don't need I don't need my, Heroku account for this anymore. Uh,
Right.
and the same thing happened when my first layoff happened. I spent a whole month getting into Next.js. I think I made the mistake of starting with Pages because it was still at that time I was sort of transitioning. Like the app version, I think, is like the newer version of the routing, was not quite there yet. It still has some weird, obvious bugs. But I spent like a full month reading the documentation. I got into I want to say Vercel for the first time. I made a Postgres backend. I made Tailwind CSS for the first time just to work with like utility stuff. And then I
What do
finally
you
got
think
into
about Tailwind?
uh I think that it
Is this
is
really popular? Like super popular right now?
I think that it's a given to have to learn it at this point. I just feel like it's like Bootstrap, but for utility classes instead of, because even Bootstrap kind of had Tailwind in it, right? Like you need like
Yeah.
W10 or something would be like with, and I just feel like Tailwind is that. Um, but yeah, I just feel like with LLMs, it's about like not using it as a crutch, but at the same time, it's just like so easy sometimes to just like understand how to do something. And it's great to just do it yourself, right? Struggle. But it's like then it slows down. And it's like to really learn, it's slow. And if you're not doing it consistently, like you'll forget it a month later, even if you spent the month on it, right?
Oh yeah.
And it's just like how quickly do you have to move on to the next thing. So just finding the balance with LLM. But Tailwind CSS, I don't really think too much about how I do CSS nowadays. I'm more LLM focused. So like for example, I try not to have a file that's too long because I found that context windows kind of struggle if you have like thousands of lines inside of any file, whether it's
I see.
CSS or a test. And
Yeah.
then when it comes to like CSS, I like to I don't know. I struggle with knowing which one's best. Like there's modules that you can use, and there's just certain ways that you can divide your CSS, like maybe like typography or like mobile or by component. But yeah, Tailwind. I've used it before. I sort of just leave it to the will of whoever I'm working for, right? Because like it's easy enough for me to spin up, but a
Yeah.
lot of times I try not to get caught up in the weeds of design too. You know what I mean? Like making something
Yeah.
pixel perfect, sure, but like I'm not making Figmas for my websites. I'm just sort of like figuring it out as I go.
A situation I ran into, like I said, I was at this job for 2 weeks and they brought me on as a junior React dev. But one of the things that they said, okay, you can't use Tailwind, you can't use, CSS processors. Our client specifically wants vanilla. They just want straight CSS. And I found that really, really difficult because I had been working with Tailwind at an internship for like maybe 6 to 9 months. And I was starting to
Mm.
get really fast with it. Like I could move stuff around all over the place really quick. It would look good. And then I'm thrown into this situation, kind of like you're saying, like you don't know what you're going to have to use on the job until you actually get there. So that was very problematic for me.
Yeah, and it's ironic because that was one of the few times I shined, where when I was working selling Lenovo laptops on my free time, I was always just at the cafe grinding and I was reading a lot of CSS documentation and I was just writing down in my notebook like all these different classes, get into Flexbox. Never really got to CSS Grid. For some reason, Flexbox I was always pretty content with. And that led to my first unofficial developer role. There's this cool thing, I don't know if you've heard of it before, it's called retrofitting, and it's basically like, let's say you have a website that is not responsive, but you can't change the HTML. Like, how can you change the appearance of it without changing the structure of it? And so then it was really important just to like get to the nitty gritty of CSS, right? Like specificity and like being able to like debug it in the inspector and just be like, okay, what is overriding what here? And like, I don't know if you remember the old meme. It was kind of like an infographic for specificity wars. It was like Star Wars. Like they basically had like a bunch of like infographics of like Star Wars characters, but it showed you how like uh, a class would have a higher weight than a selector, and an ID would have a bigger weight than like a class, and like just all these different variations to like let you know like what would override what. And I think that's when organizing vanilla CSS becomes really important, just because like you don't want to spend too long like looking for something, especially if you like have to go back and forth. So like I'm with you on that one with like Tailwind. Um, my first front end engineering role was a stealth startup. There's just a couple dudes reached out to me on LinkedIn. It was a part time contract, but it was like seeing front end software engineer for the first time, especially when I was like
Yeah.
living in my car, was like a big win for me. And they used material design, I want to say. You ever use that one? Is like it reminds me of like React Bootstrap, but it was
Is
like
it called Material UI? Is that the same thing?
yes. Yeah, Material
Okay.
UI is what it's called. I haven't used it since back then, but like I kind of got as deep into it as like with Tailwind, where you start to look at like, okay, like what components do they have? How do you set up the configuration? I think that's the key to understanding Tailwind for me. But you sound like you have way more experience with it. It was the other way around for you with the CSS vanilla, but like
Yeah,
the
that was
Tailwind
very
is fun.
difficult because I guess I never really okay, so I as a kid, I was into programming and web dev at a very young age. So we're talking, the regular HTML, not HTML5. Regular HTML. This is before CSS. This is before JavaScript was being heavily used in web dev. So I learned that kind of stuff, but then eventually kind of switched over to more like UI focus, like Dreamweaver. Um, but then, yeah, by the time I got to CSS, I just jumped right over vanilla CSS to Tailwind. And then I started getting really good with Tailwind. And then also, what I thought was cool about Tailwind is all the different components you could just bring them up. There's different websites that have the components. You could just plug it in. All the code's already written. That's a huge time saver right there. So anything that it can work in that way, I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, I'm struggling with that a little bit right now, but it's like a good struggle because you struggle so much eventually you're just like, all right, bring it on. There's this NIVO, I think it's called Nevo. It seems to be more of like a data component, data visualization library, kind of like recharts, like charts.js. And I'm exploring using that for my current project because some of it is like Map Libre, which is maybe like an open source version of like Mapbox. So like trying to use some maps for like visualizing, but then the other ones are just going to be like charts and different, you know, leave it as I go, right? Because like different strokes for different folks is kind of like that with like charts and the data you're trying to represent, like whether it's like a heat map or like a bar chart or something. I don't know what I'm going to ultimately need yet, but I don't know. I think it's one of those things where after a while, like CSS is just like, okay, like what are you doing here? Like what does the employer use? And I'm with you on that one. Like, yeah, when I looked it up, when you compare like Atomic CSS, which I think is kind of similar to uh, Tailwind, I always heard that it was like easier to spin up. It was easier to speak the same language across development teams. It's kind of an easy thing to like get ramped up on and easy to be consistent with. But I heard at one point that it was supposed to be for like startups, right? Like it's supposed like when you need to like work fast as opposed to have like a completely like custom design. But I don't know. I feel like I see Tailwind so commonly, like Tailwind, TDD, TypeScript. I see those ones very often, but every once in a while I see like
Yeah.
Post CSS, and I'm just like, sure, whatever. I
So it's
thought Post
funny.
CSS is Tailwind too.
It's funny because I feel like had I been hired at a firm that was using Tailwind, I would have I would have done really, really well. But because I ended up at a place where I couldn't use it and it's almost like it was a crutch for me, I just kind of fell apart and thought, okay, this industry is not for me. I went into recruiting for a year and hated that even more. Now I'm back, I'm doing music again. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of times God will open one door only to shut a window over here or to shut the back door. Like you really never know what's going to be on your plate, what you have. Like you said, you were living in your car at one point. I lived out of my car for about a year out in LA when things kind of fell apart for me. So it's tough, man. It's not fun.
Yeah, it's not, but it is like you said, like it's like no matter what you believe, eventually you're just like, okay, I just feel like life is steering me. Like that's how I got into stand up. It's funny, like I was boxing for like 4 or 5 years. I finally hung it up last year. And my coach was always joking, like you'd be a good stand up, you'd be like a good YouTuber or something. And
Yeah.
eventually it was just so hard to keep up with the training that is required to try to just do amateur boxing. And I was just so much better at stand up. It was just so much easier for me to be funny and for me to be like a striker. And it
Right.
was good though. Like I feel like sometimes that's sort of like the enjoyment of free will is like you can still do the thing that you're not as good at because you want to do it, you know? And eventually, who knows, like that skill, like, that's why like getting beat up made stand up easier because it's just like, well, if I bomb, I don't get beat up. But
Yeah,
I also
right.
feel like, that's what makes tech hard sometimes too, is maybe I got punched in the head too many times. But you know, the other side of it too is just like, no, like I know I can do this, Like I'm just not I feel like there's no way the economy is gonna kick my ass harder than like a pro boxer, right? I'm like the being laid off can't break my ribs, I hope.
Yeah.
Give me other health issues, but I'm gonna keep fighting.
Yeah.
Yes,
No.
all about persistence in this economy, man. And sometimes you got to look at like alternative avenues. Like for example, a lot of churches they have tech needs, tech departments, and even if you're not getting paid the most, at least you're getting paid. That's a way to kind of get in, or even nonprofits is another huge avenue that's often overlooked. So and maybe even working open source projects that can be another avenue in. Even if you have to work for free, at least you're making connections, and especially if it's a big open source project, you're going to meet people who have those connections and just say, hey man, I know this guy, he's made some great PRs. Let's take a look at having him work for our companies.
Yeah, I do like that opportunity. Like last year, I almost made a Shopify website for the cafe I love frequenting, but it's just when that's another thing. I don't know if you guys shared this before. When you're unemployed and you're just literally just doing everything you can to the point of burnout, and burnout, like
Yeah,
I didn't know burnout until being laid off. Like it messes with your head so much, and like
it
and
does.
I read like I didn't know this until reading the economic book too. It's just like when you're like impoverished, like when you're in poverty, when you're struggling and you're stressed out, like it affects your cognitive ability too. And when I started my role, I needed more than what I had, but I needed all the time that I could. Like I didn't want to code outside of work. As soon as I got hired, I was just like, okay, I want to do this job, and then I need to like regain some sense of balance
Oh,
afterwards. So I
yeah.
turned down the
Yeah,
opportunity. But like,
decompressed. Yeah.
100%. Yeah,
but like
100%.
even odd jobs too. Like last year, one thing I did do for the cafe, they got this cool thing where they allow kitchen rounds to be bought for the restaurant. So let's say customer wants to buy an $8 tip, it gets distributed to everyone who's working there at the time. It's cool. They ring a bell, other people get curious, and then they tell them, and then they buy one too. And they had an Excel sheet that basically needed to figure out, how to calculate the amount of kitchen rounds that were purchased during a certain time frame and who was working during that time. It didn't matter how long they were working, just whether they were working through that time frame, and just sort of just evenly distribute that across people. And I was able to figure that out with again ChatGPT. But that's just sort of like where I'm at with like one of the commenters from LinkedIn said like less is more with LLM prompts. I agree with that, even though for me, with my cognitive way, sometimes I'm just not necessarily asking the right question at first. Sometimes I'm not getting the right answer, so I have to like keep digging. But that's a maybe a different thing. Like I'll get the answer first, but I'll make sure that I understand it before I push it. You know what I mean? Like when I got the solution with, I think I was using Google Docs instead of Excel spreadsheet. But the whole gist of it was okay. Now that I have a solution that works, what does every single one of these functions do? What is this formula? Let's write down these words. Let's understand exactly what this is. Let's break it a little bit. And then let's make
Right.
sure that we can explain it to the owner so that way, because he knows spreadsheets enough to fiddle with it. But like that way, we know for a fact that the solution works. And just like that, like I did it. All I did was I got like a free dinner. I was like, it was pretty easy, all things considered. And I think that LLMs are also cool advantage where maybe it's making hard where maybe the economy is hard for a lot of people right now, and that's a given,
Yeah.
but maybe it's harder for people that are doing software engineering. I'm sure there's some people that are using, like I have a friend who's a server, and what they ended up doing with it is they used it just to whip up a cover letter because they were just curious, and they submitted it, and they were very qualified in their role as a server, but they got a role like right away, like same day. And
Wow.
so I feel like a lot of different people are still discounting the fact that like, everyone talks about it reducing critical thinking, and I'm not arguing that at all, right? There's many valid issues with it, but imagine you're a kid right now in like high school, and you're
Right.
reading and you're writing, but you're also using ChatGPT or something to just like not a lot of people have access to like libraries or things like that. And imagine you're just like a curious person and you're just constantly asking questions. And there's probably a lot of jobs right now where like we've all heard of those like dream situations on Reddit where someone's just like venting that like they've gotten paid exorbitant amounts of money and don't do anything because they figured out a script to it, and now they're just afraid
Yeah.
to tell anyone because they're like, I know as soon as I tell someone, it would be good to be honest, and yet I
Then the
would get let
jig's
go.
up.
Yeah,
Yeah, then the
and
jig's
so
up.
they just feel guilty about it, but I'm sure there's a lot of people right now and that's just the way to sort of like, I don't want to call it fight back because I don't really want to like create the dynamic, but again, reading about like the economic stuff where it's just sort of like the employers versus the employees, the producers versus the consumers, like just things like that. It's like just figure out how to create advantages for yourself. Doesn't matter if it's technology like a LLM, but I do feel like for sure, like there's ways to use it poorly, and there's ways to like put yourself in a position that makes you far more able and qualified than somebody else. So I'm just trying to find
Yeah,
that angle with it and like not drain somebody's water source at the same time. I feel like
yeah.
that's a big issue I hear about a lot with AI
Cool.
data centers. I haven't looked into it enough. I just hear enough to like be like, okay, this sounds like it is factual. So I don't know what you guys know about that.
Hey man, we're at the top of the hour. It's awesome having you on, man. Yeah, sorry, having some connection issues. A laptop wouldn't charge, so had to come back on the phone. But
No, you're good.
yeah, man. Before we get out of here, did you want to leave our audience with any closing thoughts, and where can they find you at?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Jonathan Hammond, John and Micah Hamill, just in case you got like details afterwards, I can send you my URL. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, just let me know. Just keep learning. You know what I mean? The things are tough right now. And if you look back at history, there's always times where it's been really tough. And just right now, it's just get hard and just like figure it out.
Uh,